Good afternoon and welcome to the Asian Midday Marketwatch. Our guest today is David Cole, founder of the Smart Investor in Singapore. David, great to have you back on the show.
You're very kind, Brian. It's great to be back in Singapore. Although, as some of your viewers might recognize, this is not my front room, but in fact, some stay-at-home facility on Orchard Road.
Well, you're in a gilded prison for the next 2 weeks, right?
So, well, some might call it a gilded prison. Other people might call it a padded cell. But now I know how a tiger feels when he's caged, and I just spend my time prowling around this room here, trying to get some exercise and waiting for the doorbell to ring, because they ring it 3 times a day to tell you that your food is at the door.
That's really like a tiger. They've got you trained up.
They just drop your food outside, and then they run away and they ring the bell, and then you have to go and pick it up yourself. So anyway, I've got another 11 days of this to look forward to.
Now, David, before we get your insights, let's take a look at how markets are performing across the region. We're going to start with the crypto markets. Bitcoin is at 43,637.2. It's up 0.3%. Ethereum is at just over 3,000 at 3,001.55. It's down 0.56%. But if we look across stock markets across the region, China and Hong Kong are closed today. So we will start closer to home with the SGX. The Straits Times Index is at 3,051.28. It's down 1.15%. Bursa Malaysia's FBM KLCI is at 1,528.99. It's down 0.57%. The Nikkei is at 28,737.3. It's down 2.43%. The ASX 200 is down 2.06% at 7,181.2. Rounding up the numbers, we've got the Kospi, which is down 1.56% at 3,021.89. David, what's your view on this negativity around markets this afternoon?
Well, Brian, how much time have we got? Because I mean, the list is about as long as my arm at the moment. So first of all, we've got things like slowing economic growth. I mean, we're seeing that in China, and a lot of people said that the bounce back that we had after many economies had reopened, that is beginning to fade away now. And so we've got slowing economic growth. Secondly, we've got possible tapering over in the US, and central banks are now kind of aware that all this talk about inflation is not imaginary, and that this inflation might be a little bit more persistent. And the Federal Reserve has already said that inflation might be around for a little while longer than they originally thought. Then we've got China that seems to be imploding at the moment. We've got fading fiscal support from many governments, because many governments around the world are saying we're bankrupt, we haven't got any more money left, and so therefore there's going to be less fiscal support. And then we've also got bottlenecks around the place, and that is fueling inflation as well, because many of the manufacturers are saying, hey, we want this, we want chips, we want this, we want that, we don't seem to be able to get it. And so there are lots of things for investors to worry about.
So then, zooming in a little bit on China itself, I think there's a lot of concerns around the slowdown in China. You lived in Hong Kong for many years. What's your view on this slowdown? Are we in for a protracted period of slowdown?
I think so. And I think part of the reason is that China is trying to go through this rebalancing at the moment, because previously they were very dependent on the manufacturing sector. And as we saw from the latest industrial figures that came out from China, industrial production has gone into contraction. And in some ways, China might say that's not a bad thing for it, because it doesn't really want to be the sweatshop of the world anymore. And so therefore, the manufacturing sector is contracting. And that is partly because the rest of the world is not buying as much stuff. And secondly, because it is something that China wants. China doesn't want to sort of make our T-shirts and jeans anymore. They would much rather some of the other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam and Philippines go and do that. So that's number one. Number two, we have to remember that a great deal of China's economic growth has come from the construction sector. They were building lots of condos, lots of offices, and maybe they built too much of the stuff, and many of the construction companies, the property developers had borrowed too much money in order to build these buildings for people, and they're having trouble selling them at the moment. So is this a temporary phenomenon? I think probably for a little while it is. But as far as China is concerned, they're going to have to sort of work through this. And as you and I know, and many of your viewers will know, China is a command economy. So they don't rely on the market to decide where the money is going to be spent. It is really the Communist Party that will decide how that money is going to be deployed within the Chinese economy. If they get it right, then I think things will be solved. But if they get it wrong, then I think we're in for a protracted period of slower economic growth in China.
Now, David, I want to zoom in on specific stocks, because I read an interesting article today on your site, The Smart Investor, which is basically 4 stocks that can help you enjoy your retirement. I want to start with the first one, which is Parkway Life REIT. Now, that's a REIT that has a portfolio of 3 hospitals in Singapore, 51 nursing homes in Japan, and a specialist clinic in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Why was that picked as one of the 4 stocks?
Well, I think it is because of the aging population. As you can see, my hair is turning quite gray at the moment, and I am falling into that category of the silver surfer. Some people call me the silver fox, but I just called it getting older. And because of the aging population, people in my age group and probably slightly older than me, we're going to be requiring many of these specialist services that Parkway Life, which is a REIT on which IHH Hospital sits. So over here we have Gleneagle, we have Mount Elizabeth, that is part of the IHH group, and we'll be requiring those kind of services. And it doesn't really take a genius to work out that as the population starts to age, we are going to be requiring things like maybe hip replacement, knee replacements, and the various other services that these hospitals can provide. So I think there is a lot of tailwind for these, for Parkway Life, and also for the hospital sector. Then, of course, you've got things like medical tourism that is taking place, where people will go to where they think they will be able to get the best medical care.
Now, the second stock on the list is OCBC, a bellwether stock on the SGX. It is one of Singapore's 3 big local banks, has more than 460 branches and rep offices in 19 countries across the region. What's the secret sauce there that makes this an attractive retirement stock?
Well, I think it is because of the ability of management to control costs. And let's not forget that this is almost a family-owned bank. And as far as the family is concerned, it's their pension fund. And they don't want anybody who is in charge of that bank to mess things up, not only for shareholders like myself. I own shares in OCBC. And by the way, I also own shares in Parkway Life. And so consequently, I think our money is safe with that kind of bank, where the owners of the bank have a huge amount of skin in the game, and they are going to make sure that that bank is robust enough and also strong enough to withstand all kinds of headwinds. But the other thing I think is, I think most investors should try and sort of have some banking stocks in their portfolio, because as we come out of recession, and we are coming out of recession at the moment, many of the businesses out there that have been tightening their belts will have to start loosening their belts and start borrowing money again. And of course, that is good for the banks. And if we believe that the Federal Reserve is going to start tightening monetary policy, maybe not this year, but certainly next year, they'll be thinking about increasing interest rates. That will actually bode well for the banks, because it means that their net interest margin will start to widen, which therefore means more profits for the bank and a better return for shareholders.
Now, David, the last 2 stocks are both REITs. One is Mapletree Logistics Trust, which basically owns a portfolio of about 160 properties. Then you've got Frasers Centrepoint Trust, which owns a portfolio of 9 suburban malls in Singapore. So why did those 2 REITs make the list?
Well, I think as far as the Mapletree Logistics Trust is concerned, we all recognize that internet shopping, e-tailing, whatever you want to call it, shopping on the internet is going to be a pretty big thing. And therefore means that if we are going to be placing an order with an internet retailer over here in Singapore, there is a pretty good chance those goods will be coming in from overseas, which will therefore need to go into logistics centers. So I think logistics centers is another way of playing the internet shopping phenomenon. It's kind of difficult sometimes to pick the right retailers, but it is not that difficult to pick the shovels and picks and shovels companies such as Mapletree Logistics Trust, which owns warehouses. The other one that you mentioned was Frasers Centrepoint Trust, which has suburban malls. And I think we can also recognize that things have changed. I think the pandemic has changed the way that many of us are thinking about how we go to work. And perhaps the days when everybody went from suburbia and came down into the central business district and trotted into their office around Shenton Way, I think those days are changing. And so therefore, a lot of people will be staying where they live in suburbia. And as a result of that, they're not going to be spending as much time in central Singapore, downtown Singapore. That will be reserved for tourists. And the rest of us will just be staying in suburbia, which therefore means that those kind of shopping malls will have a pretty long lead time as far as their futures are concerned.
But David, there's also the other flip side of the equation in the sense that because of this boom in e-commerce, particularly with the younger population, they're not actually going to spend as much time in malls. They're going to be holed up at home. They're getting used to the idea of just being at home.
Well, you know, I think a lot of the shoppers these days are very savvy. They use a technique called scan and scram. Effectively, what they do. Well, you're laughing because you know what it means. Because what they do is they go to these suburban malls, they go to any malls and have a look at the products they like. They scan it and then they scram. They go home and then they see if they can get it cheaper on the internet. That is number one. And number two is that, and I think we can also recognize that many of the shopping malls are changing. Many of the shopping malls that I go to today, such as Plaza Singapura, seems to have a lot more food and beverage than traditional retailers. And so they are changing the mix in order to correspond to the changing demands from the people that go to these shopping malls. So people go there for dining, and at the same time, they might even go into the shops and go and have a look to see if there's anything they want for instant gratification rather than to order it on the internet. But ultimately, if you are in suburbia, you don't really want to be cooking at home. You much rather go down to the food courts in these shopping malls or go into the restaurants, get something to eat, and then go back home again.
Now, David, it's been great chatting with you again. Thank you very much for your insights.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Now, we've been speaking to David Kuo, the founder of the Smart Investor from Singapore, on Biztech Asian Midday Marketwatch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Please check out our various platforms as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Thank you very much for tuning in.